Genres involve the managing and fulfillment of audience expectations, but need to provide variations within those expectations, and potentially even carefully violate them on occasion, in order to avoid losing its audience due to stasis. This is usually seen with conventions, certain stereotypes that define the genre of films and other media. In this video essay, I'll be focusing on some of the many conventions of the horror genre, using examples from the horror renaissance of the 70s and 80s, and the more modern films of the 21st century. These will be separated into two main groups: visual conventions and thematic conventions. In both classic and modern horror, low-key lighting is used throughout the film's narrative, especially during moments of tension and climax. The emphasis of shadows emphasizes a sense of mystery and anxiety, abusing the biological fear of the dark. This can be seen in films like The Descent. The use of low ambient lighting is also highly used in the horror genre. A key example of this would be the use of candles, giving light to a scene without making it entirely devoid of shadows. On the opposition of this, some horror films utilize the use of high-key lighting to put the viewer into a false sense of security, only to manipulate or abuse this later in its narrative. Like for example, Ari Aster's Midsommar, which follows our main character Dani as she is manipulated to joining a cult while being pushed away from the rest of her group. One conventional use of composition is the use of negative space. Having a character only taking up a small amount of space in frame creates a sense of vulnerability, anxiety, and tension. This uninhabited space by the character makes audiences expect a jump scare, especially when there is empty space behind their shoulder, usually taking over only a third of the frame. This can also be used to take advantage of the viewer's expectations by creating a prolonged scare, or a fake out. Another example of composition used in horror films is the use of the Dutch or canted angle. This type of angle is used to enhance a sense of anxiety in the audience due to the framing of the scene being unconventional for other genres, making the situation seem off, which is usually used to highlight a character's faults or discomfort, or to emphasize a sense of danger. Point of view shots, also known as POV shots, are a conventional shot type used in the horror genre, more often in the slasher subgenre. This shot is usually used to show the point of view of the killer, or in other words, the slasher, which can be used to increase tension by using longer shots, mostly in a first take sequence like in the opening of Halloween from 1978. This is used to highlight the looming danger on the other characters in these scenes. POV shots are also used in the perspective of the victim as they are attacked, emphasizing the final impact of the killer's chosen weapon, allowing the viewer to exaggerate the violence used due to this camera method. An iconic use of this would be the many deaths of Tree in Happy Death Day from 2017, a film where the main character is in a Groundhog Day time loop centered around her birthday, which ends with her death. In a world ordered by sexual imbalance, pleasure in looking has been split between active male and passive female. The determining male gaze projects its fantasy onto the female figure. In horror, there's an overarching hierarchy of different genders and their roles in their respective films. In older horrors, especially slashers, female characters are either seen as damsels in distress, such as in The Shining, or they are usually sexualized, for example, Bride of Chucky and The Substance.
Pretty girls should always smile!
These two elements can be combined to create the trope of the final girl, which Men, Women and Chainsaws describes as abject horror personified. This character type is considered innocent, not taking part in drugs or sex like other victims of the film, especially slashers, or, in some cases, being overly observant or paranoid. In the modern horror, this convention is either criticized in films such as The Substance, or ignored by making the main female character fend for themselves and not rely on any male help. Good examples of this can be You're Next or Ready or Not. Another theme is the use of the body, using the fear of transformation and mutilation to disturb viewers, especially with the existence of the unknown. A key example of this is the alien life in both The Thing, directed by John Carpenter, and Alien, directed by Ridley Scott. The history of the horror film is essentially a history of anxiety in the 20th century, arguably more than any other genre. It has interrogated the deep-seated effects of change and responded to the newly determined grand narratives of social, scientific, and philosophical thought. Throughout the development of the horror genre, the genre tends to focus on the taboo of society at the time, whether that was commenting on the AIDS crisis through vampires and werewolves, or commenting on other societal issues. This is usually used to develop a sense of shock factor within audiences. This has caused a lot of controversy, however, during the genre's development. Two key examples of this would be the use of video nasties from the 1970s to 1980s, and the suspected influence of Child's Play 3 on the murder of James Bulger in 1993, which caused widespread media panic following the case, despite the lack of correlation in court. However, due to the desensitization of the prolific gore used in horror, the modern film tends to exaggerate the gore and violence in films, mostly through the use of blood. Some examples of this are Radio Silence's Ready or Not and Abigail, as well as Mark Fishback's 2026 film Iron Lung. Another common theme in horror films is the use of religion or demonic imagery. In classic horror of the 70s and 80s, religion was utilized to emphasize the antagonists of films of this genre, either through subtle hints or by describing the character in such a manner, like in Halloween.
Blank, pale, emotionless face, and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes.
In more modern films, this is shown through the use of rituals and sacrifices, introducing an element of the supernatural and almost magical. A good example of this could be the ritual scene in the second half of Ready or Not, where the Le Domas family are sacrificing Grace after capturing her.
We renew our pledge this night, as our ancestors before us.
Religion is often used as a way to bring comfort, or in some cases fear of the end, to the characters in the film's narrative. For example, many characters describe world-ending events as a sign from God. This can be seen in the film The Mist, through the character of Miss Carmody, as she uses religion to explain the unnatural, almost eldritch events currently going on in the film's town.
We are being punished for what? For going against the will of God.
This manipulation of religion is criticized in more recent films such as Heretic. The use of youth and young children is a common trope in the horror genre. Since youth is associated with innocence, it's less likely for them to be involved with anything violent or disturbing. When horror inverts this perception, it adds a sense of unease. Examples of this could be the use of ghost children, like for example in The Shining, or children being possessed by a malicious entity. Examples of this can be The Exorcist or Late Night with the Devil. The use of innocent and youthful imagery can also be used through inanimate objects, like dolls or other toys. Examples of films including this in the 70s and 80s is Child's Play, and in the 21st century with The Boy and Megan. These thematic conventions, or tropes, can be arguably predictable to the average viewer. So predictable that they are often made fun of or criticised in films like The Cabin in the Woods, as well as the Scream and Scary Movie franchises.